We all use money every day, but there's one currency out there that holds a power that goes way beyond just buying stuff. It can literally build up a nation, or it can tear it down. We are, of course, talking about the US dollar. And today, we're going to break down exactly how this piece of paper transformed into the single most powerful financial weapon on the planet.
Just think about it for a second. We've got other massive global powers out there, right? You've got China, you've got Russia, but their currencies don't run the world. So the first big question we've got to tackle is, why the dollar? How on earth did this one currency become the undisputed king?
And that, of course, leads us to the second and maybe even more important question. How did all that power get turned into a weapon? See, when the US decides to impose sanctions, it can bring an entire country's economy to its knees almost overnight. Now, other countries, they can use sanctions too, but they just don't have the same kind of bite. So let's dig in and find out why.
To really get the dollar's power, we have to wind the clock way back. For thousands of years, people just used the barter system. I'll trade you my chickens for your wheat. But that was super inefficient. You can't exactly save up a bunch of tomatoes for a big purchase later, right? The solution was to start using valuable things that don't rot, like gold and silver, as money.
But let's be real, carrying around heavy bags of gold, it's not just impractical, it's dangerous. So, this brilliant system was developed over in ancient China. Here's how it worked. You'd take your heavy gold to a trusted merchant, and they give you a signed piece of paper for it, basically an IOU for your gold. This little paper note was light, it was easy to carry, and you could trade with it. And the best part? You could go back and get your actual gold anytime you wanted. This was, for all intents and purposes, the birth of paper money. And this basic idea eventually grew up and became what we call the gold standard. The rule was beautifully simple. A country could only print as much paper money as it had actual physical gold sitting in its vaults. Every single dollar bill was just a stand-in, a promise for a real piece of gold.
Now, long before the dollar was the big boss, there wasn't another king on the throne. Back in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the British Empire was the economic giant of the world, and its currency, the pound sterling, was the global standard. At its peak, an incredible 60% of all international trade was done in pounds.
So what happened?
Well, in one word, war. The two world wars didn't just change maps, they completely flipped the entire global order on its head. And out of all that chaos, economic power shifted, big time, from a collapsing Europe to a rising America.
And this slide really paints the picture perfectly. On one side, you have Europe, just buried in debt, its cities and factories turned to rubble. But on the other side, the United States was booming. It had stayed out of the fighting at first, and it got rich selling weapons, food, and supplies to everybody. And just look at the result of that boom. By the time World War II was over, the US had managed to accumulate a staggering 70% of the entire world's gold reserves. It was the only major economic power left standing on solid financial ground. It was unbelievable. So with the world's financial system basically in ashes, 44 allied nations got together in this little town in New Hampshire called Bretton Woods back in 1944. Their mission? To design a brand new, stable system that would prevent another economic catastrophe and get global trade moving again. And the system they came up with? It was genius in its simplicity. Here's the hierarchy. At the very top, you have gold. Then, the US dollar would be pegged directly to that gold. And finally, every other currency in the world would be pegged to the US dollar. Just like that, in a single move, the dollar was placed at the absolute center of the new global economy. And to make this whole thing work, the US made a rock-solid promise to the rest of the world. They guaranteed that any country, anytime, could show up and exchange 35 US dollars for 1 ounce of pure gold. And with 70% of the world's gold sitting in its vaults, this was a promise America could make with total confidence. But then came the absolute masterstroke. A year later, the US cut a deal with Saudi Arabia that would change everything. The deal was, the US provides military protection, and in return, Saudi Arabia agrees to sell all of its oil only in US dollars. Now think about that. Since every single modern economy on Earth needed oil, every country now needed a constant flow of US dollars just to function. This created a permanent global demand for the dollar that had nothing to do with gold. And for a while, this whole system worked like a dream. But, a little comfortable. It started printing way more dollars than it actually had gold to back them up, spending huge amounts on things like the Vietnam War. Well, other countries weren't stupid. They started getting nervous and began trading in their dollars for real gold, and America's gold reserves started draining away fast.
And then it happened. On the evening of August 15th, 1971, President Richard Nixon got on TV and made an announcement that was so shocking it would change the world's financial system forever.
The world was just in complete disbelief. This event immediately became known as the Nixon shock. In one single move, the United States tore down the entire Bretton Woods system that it had built. The dollar's final link to gold was severed. The promise was officially broken.
So here's the bottom line. It was like the US had written a check to the entire world and then suddenly announced, oh, by the way, there's no money in that account. That check had just bounced. But, and this is the crazy, everyone had to keep accepting the bounced check. Why? Because the whole global economy was already completely hooked on the dollar for buying oil and for doing international trade. There was just no other game in town.
And this new dollar, totally untied from gold, is what allows for this modern system of economic warfare. So let's break down how it works. First, you have primary sanctions. That just means no US person or company can do business with a target country. But then comes the real power, secondary sanctions. This is where the US tells the rest of the world that if they do business with the target, they'll be punished too. And finally, you have the nuclear option, the SWIFT cutoff, which basically kicks a country out of the entire global banking system.
Yeah, getting cut off from SWIFT, no joke. It is literally like dropping a financial nuclear bomb on a country. Instantly, they can't pay for crucial imports like food or medicine. They can't get paid for their exports. Their entire economy can be paralyzed in the blink of an eye.
So you might be wondering, has anyone actually tried to challenge this system? Well, yes, and it's a pretty sobering story. Back in 2000, Iraq's Saddam Hussein started selling his oil in euros instead of dollars. A few years later, his government was overthrown. Libya's Muammar Gaddafi proposed a new, gold-backed currency for all of Africa to compete with the dollar. Not long after, he was toppled in a civil war. And when Iran made plans to sell its oil in euros, it got hit with absolutely crippling sanctions. A pretty powerful message was sent to the rest of the world.
Right, so for decades, that message has been received loud and clear. But today, something feels like it's shifting. The huge, sweeping sanctions placed on a major economy like Russia have really been a wake-up call for the rest of the world, showing them just how vulnerable they are to the dollar's power, and it's sparking a global push to find another way. People are calling this movement de-dollarization, and we are seeing some very real steps being taken. The BRICS nations are actively looking for alternatives. Saudi Arabia has actually started selling oil to China in the Chinese yuan. Russia and China are just bypassing the dollar altogether when they trade with each other. And there's even serious talk about creating a new, shared BRICS currency. But let's be clear, replacing the dollar is a massive, massive challenge.